This episode of the WP Builds podcast is brought to you by GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. Find out more at go.me/WP Builds. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Nathan.
We're going to do this in Yorkshire accent today, apparently.
Yeah.
No, we're not. No, we're not. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's
Good.
Mark. Went the wrong
Every
way.
time.
I know, it's wrong. That's Mark Westgard. Look, there he is, Mark Westgard from WS Form, the WordPress Form plugin. We're doing a 6-part webinar series. We've done 2 episodes so far. Fear not, though, each of them are distinct and self-contained. So if you missed them so far, it doesn't really matter. I'll just give you a bit of a rundown on what we've done so far. The first episode a couple of weeks ago was all about just building the form within the WS Form UI. And then last week we covered building interactive forms and conditional logic and variables and cascading and all of that fun stuff. And today we're going to be talking about preventing form spam and improving email deliverability. That's right, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, good. I don't even know where the word spam came from. In the UK, spam is this like tinned meat product that you can buy, and nobody likes it. It's kind of, the poor man's food, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it became the universal word for stuff that comes into your inbox that you don't want to see.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about all of that, but we're treating this as basically as me and Mark just having a conversation. However, given the nature of the fact that it's live, if anybody is watching this and they want to put a comment, feel free, do that. We've had a couple of comments on the shows that we've done previously, and we've answered any questions that have arisen. If you want to do that, probably if you're on the WP Builds live page, which is at that URL, wpbuilds.com/live, you need to be logged into a Google account because it's YouTube comments. If you're watching this on one of the Facebook streams that we do, you've got a little extra step. You've got to go to chat.restream.io/FB if you want to share your name and avatar. You don't need to do that. We just won't know who you are. That's all. But you can always add your name into the comment that you make. Shall we get stuck into it, Mark?
Yeah, let's crack on.
Shall I share the screen at this point, or is there some preamble that you want to go through?
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Let's share the presentation.
And if memory serves, last week we found that was a better display like that. Should we go with that one?
Good. Yeah, and I've even charged my mouse this time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we should be good.
Yeah. Good. All right, it's over to you. Preventing form spam and improving email deliverability. Nice.
Yeah. So let's go for it. So just to remind everybody, we are doing 20% off any of the WS Form editions. And if you go had to do that for Nathan. If you go to wpbuilds.com/link/WS Form and use coupon code WPBuild, you can get 20% off. So that's the personal, the freelance, or the agency edition. And also, if you get like the personal edition and you want to buy an add-on, it includes the 20% off those as well.
So funny.
All right. So the aim of today is to help you get form submissions from a user to you, the recipient. That's our ultimate aim, is to try and improve that process. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. There's, first of all, we want to prevent submissions that you don't want to receive from bots and things like that. And then we also want to improve the ability for those emails to get to you if it's coming from a user that you do want that information from. So we're going to just quickly go through the life cycle of a form submission. So basically, a user is going to use your form on a client, such as a web browser. That form is going to get submitted to your server. In this case, we're using WS Form as the form plugin. And that is then going to send an email to yourself, to the recipient. Now, WS Form can do a lot more besides just send one email. It can send emails to multiple recipients, or it could be sending information to, I don't know, MailChimp or Constant Contact. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're just going to talk about this life cycle. Along the way, There's lots of other things that happen, and we're trying to stop this little guy on the bottom left-hand side, the bot. We don't like him. We don't
No.
want him to. Well, first of all, we don't want him to even get to the form. We don't want him to get to the server or send an email or reach you. So there's different things that we can do along the way to try and prevent that, but also get that user through to the recipient. So just very briefly, and I'll go into some of these a little bit more. But on the user side, before they even hit your website, and I won't go into this much today because this is, a whole presentation in itself. But there are things you can do on the hosting side to try and prevent people that you don't want filling out your form accessing your website, such as WAF, which is a web application firewall. A lot of the times that is provided by what's called mod security, which is a module that runs on your server. And it will be using a rule set to determine whether or not we like that user accessing the site, such as an OWASP core rule set. Now, a lot of hosting providers provide that functionality out of the box. So, if you're using someone like Rocket.net, for example, they have all of this functionality built in. And it's all managed, hence the term managed WordPress hosting. So if you are using managed WordPress hosting, a lot of the time this stuff is being done for you. On the client side, on the form itself, so let's assume that bot has actually got through that and managed to reach the client. Maybe a spammer is actually going onto websites and filling forms out. There are things we can do on the client side to try and prevent them from submitting lots and lots of submissions on your page. AI is one of those. So AI, we're all talking about AI. We do that on the WP Builds Monday cast that you do, Nathan. And AI can be used to determine whether or not the user on your website is a bot or not. And we'll quickly have a look at that in a moment. Honeypot is another way that we can try and prevent automated submissions from coming through to you. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Captures, we're all familiar with those with like reCAPTCHA, HCAPTCHA, Cloudflare, Turnstile. There's lots of different captures out there. WS Forms supports 3 different captures. reCAPTCHA, which is the one provided by Google. HCAPTCHA, which is a capture that is a little bit more, they say ethical. It doesn't capture so much data and stuff about the user. And then Cloudflare Turnstile, which is my personal favorite, which is a little less intrusive. It's more accessible as well. So that's the one that I prefer. And then also validation. So on the form itself, we can put some validation in place to make sure the data that's entered on that form is formatted in the way that we want to receive it. So a lot of bots will just fill out a form with rubbish and don't necessarily take into account that validation that's going on the client side. So by introducing validation, and we'll have a look at that in a demo in a minute, we can try and prevent submissions by introducing validation on fields. Once that form is submitted and we get to the server side, there are other things that we can do. So again, with AI, we've got things like OpenAI, where we can check for malicious content and things like that. Akismet can look for spam content. There are third-party services like CleanTalk, which will actually block submissions from certain IP addresses and do a multitude of other things. Some of those services are really great to look at. We're going to talk about NONCE as well, which is a number used once. And that can be used to try and stop multiple submissions coming in using data from that form, and it'll actually expire after a certain amount of time, so that can't be used again. And we'll talk about that. And also server-side validation, which is where you can write some custom PHP to validate any of the field content coming through. On the email side, there are different services that you can use to detect things like fake emails. There are emails called disposable email addresses, which spammers will tend to use. And we can detect those and see if there are actual submissions coming through using those fake email addresses. We can also then look at SMTP providers to improve the deliverability of the emails that we do want. And we'll go into email deliverability in the second part of this presentation on how to improve the emails coming through to the recipient. And then ultimately, at the end, this is something you can't control, but you can if it's yourself, but spam detection in your inbox, basically. So ways of reducing the chance of an email going into an inbox and being classed as spam. So that's the life cycle. this is only a small sample, really, of things that you can do, but hopefully some of the key things we'll go through today.
Can I just ask you on the first one there, the user one? I've been very lucky in that typically months go by and I get the occasional piece of email spam through a contact form.
Yeah.
But then it seems to go in sort of waves. I'll have a week where there's definitely an uptick in that. But, in Facebook groups and things like that, you do hear horror stories of people who are just getting absolutely pounded.
Yeah.
So is this genuinely, for some people, it's more than an inconvenience. It is kind of crippling to their email inbox. And, you're just getting deluged with thousands a day, which mean that all of that productivity that you might have figured out in your inbox has just been shot to pieces.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more of a challenge to stop that at that user end, because these bots are coming in from multiple IP addresses. They used to just come in from one IP address, so you could just block it. Now they're coming in from thousands of different IP addresses, and it's not just email spam. I mean, this WAF, the web application firewalls, can be used to stop all manner of traffic to your website. So people just accessing your site and hitting it, and maybe siphoning pages off your server. It's becoming more and more difficult. The way that the mod security system works is it's looking for patterns of traffic coming through, so certain strings. So if it sees a certain word it doesn't like, it will potentially block that for you. And services like Cloudflare as well, for example, have some other great software built in, such as they have a challenge page that will come up.
Yes.
You may have seen that sometimes.
Yeah.
And it will say, hey, I'm not too sure who you are. Please confirm you're a human. So it's just a constant battle, isn't it? They come up with a new way of doing things, and someone else has to come up with a way of stopping it. Fortunately, we were talking just a minute ago, being lucky that we live in the day and age that we do. There are some fantastic services out there now that can help cut this down. It's never perfect. But
I guess that's it. It is a bit of tennis, isn't it? Constantly just trying to figure it out. But, an analogy would be how, if you were getting 12,000 email spam letters a day, imagine that the postman came to your front door and literally pushed 12,000 letters through your door. You're never going to get through that, are you? And the same would be true. So a really interesting topic. Obviously, if you are in any way, shape or form building websites for yourself or for clients, this stuff, although it's perhaps not the hot topic, if you know what I mean, it's super important. So thank you, Mark. This is going to be great.
Yeah, so, just very quickly again, first of all, we're going to talk about preventing form spam. We'll go through some things like the client side and the server side, ways of preventing that. This slide deck, I guess I'll probably make this available somewhere, but I put some links at the bottom of each page that link through to knowledge base articles and things like that as we're going through. But
thank you.
First of all, just want to talk about Honeypot. First of all, a lot of people have heard about Honeypot. So I thought I'd explain how that works. So on a form, you've got your regular fields, maybe your first name, your last name, a submit button, etc. What Honeypot does is it adds a field to that form that you cannot see. So what we do is we move that Honeypot field out of the way. And from your perspective, it just looks like a normal form. From a bot's perspective, they actually see that Honeypot field. So basically on the server, we're expecting to make sure that Honeypot field has to be blank. It hasn't been filled out. A bot will come along, it'll see that Honeypot field, and it'll try and fill that out, because 9 times out of 10, a bot will just go onto your form, fill out every field with some data. Because it doesn't see what you see through a browser, it doesn't realize that Honeypot's actually off the screen, and we want that to be blank. Therefore, the server receives a value in that Honeypot field, and the server will go, no, I'm not going to accept that email submission. So to set that up in WS Form is very, very easy. You just go to Form Settings, and then you go to Spam, and then you just check Honeypot, and it does it for you. So very, very simple to set that up. You don't have to add any fields or anything like that to get that working. But that's roughly how Honeypot works.
Can I ask you a question about that? Is that basically some sort of, is that CSS? It's being hidden, pushed off the side by CSS. And do the people who, the robot software creators, do some of them look for that? They're taking into account the fact that it's CSS. And also when you create the form,
Yeah.
Does it utilize the same, I don't know, classes and things wrapped around that form label? In other words, would it be possible to know, to create a bank of WordPress form plugins, and this is going to be the Honeypot class for WS Form, and this will be the other ones, and so on?
Yeah, so we don't use classes on that Honeypot field. We actually use inline styles to move it.
Okay.
Now, yeah, some bots are going to be clever enough and go, hang on a minute, they've moved this off the screen. Something's going on with the styling on this. This is not a foolproof method. It's just one method that you can use. Now, the other thing you have to be careful of, and this is for all form plugins, not just WS Form, make sure that Honeypot field is accessible as well. But what I mean by that is if you use like Lighthouse, for example, to check if your site is accessible and you've got a good accessibility score, some Honeypot fields, if they're not coded correctly, can cause problems with accessibility because that form can still be considered as being on the page, and that can cause problems for people that are maybe using the keyboard to navigate a form.
Oh, right, yeah.
So we've made sure that the Honeypot field is accessible and doesn't really come into play when you're filling that form out. So that's Honeypot.
Okay.
NONCE. I want to talk about NONCE quickly. So what a NONCE does, it's a number used once. So what we do is we can put a special code, it's called a hash, on the form. And when the form is submitted, we check that hash. And if that hash is valid, we allow the form to be submitted. So NONCE is actually a process that's used by WordPress. You're actually using nonces. You don't realize it when you're using the admin. So whenever you submit something on the admin, there are nonces flying around to check that those admin requests that are coming in are in fact legitimate. And they're basically used to legitimize requests and make sure that the request that's coming in is what we want. So for example, if a bot were to come on, take your form, and then try and submit it over and over again over a period of 3 days, eventually that nonce is going to not work and they can no longer submit that form. Now, the term nonce is kind of weird in WordPress because nonces in WordPress are not used once. They don't expire once they've been used. They actually expire over a period of time. It's kind of weird the way it works. They expire between, after 12 to 24 hours. And the reason for that is, if you set a nonce up at say 1 a.m., that nonce will actually be live all the way through to midnight. So it could last for 23 hours.
Right.
If you set the nonce at 1 p.m., it works so that you're in the second part of the day and that nonce lasts for 11 hours. So all you need to know really is a nonce lifespan is between 12 and 24 hours. And the reason I'm raising that is if you're going to use a nonce on a form, make sure that your caching on your site is not longer than say 10, 11, 12 hours, because otherwise you're going to start getting nonces that become stale in those cache results. Now, we actually disable nonce by default because we get so many issues with cached nonces. A lot of hosting these days just has caching switched on everywhere. And they don't take into account that nonces may be taken into account. So you need to enable this. And again, this is this is a global setting in WS Form. You can go to settings, go to advanced, and then just check a box to say enable nonce. The way nonces work is they're a combination of different things. They have a time element to them, which is obviously when it was set. It has an action, and the action determines what that nonce is being used for. Nonces are also tied to individual users as well. So if you have a user that's logged in, that nonce can only be used by them and nobody else. And there's also a random seed in there to make that nonce random. So that's nonces. And yeah, again, to enable that, you can just go to WS Form, go to settings, and enable that setting if you want to.
Good point about the caching, though. So if you're experiencing problems with your forms and you've got nonces enabled, that might be a good first place to check.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just have a quick demo and we'll look at some of these spam features. So I'm going to change what I'm sharing.
Okie doke.
We'll go back to there. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I just want to quickly show you the settings for these. So if we go to form settings at the top right here, so this is just a basic contact us form that we've created. We'll go to form settings and then we'll go to spam here, so the spam folder. Here's human presence, and this is basically an AI system for detecting whether or not the person on your site is a human or not. It's a third-party service, and there's information here about how to set that up if you want to. So what will happen is when the form is shown, human presence will run. It'll determine whether or not it's a human or not, and if it's not a human, it'll stop that form being submitted. It's as simple as that. And they actually have, the nice thing about human presence is if you're just running one site, I believe they just give you a free site to play with, so you can try that service out. Akismet can be enabled on forms. So Akismet you may be familiar with. It's actually a WordPress product. And what Akismet does is we send the form submission through to Akismet, and then they check it for spammy words. And then if it finds that there's spam on a particular submission, we then flag that as spam, and you can decide whether or not you want to accept that submission or not. If you want to enable Honeypot, you can just check that box there. It's as simple as that. And then WS Form does all the work for you. So very simple to switch that on. Now, some spam systems return a spam, what's the right word for it?
Like a score?
It's a score, yeah. So 0 is basically no spam, 100 is blatant spam. And you can actually control the level at which you think something's spam here. We leave that at 50 by default, but if you find that you're getting too much spam, you can bring that down a little bit. If you find that it's blocking too much, you can increase it.
With that in mind, is it better to start with it lower and ramp it up so that at least the submissions are getting through? Yeah. And you can start to detect, okay, there's too much, and then you can just sort of slowly move that dial up towards midway.
Yeah, I mean, 50, in general, when I create a form, I enable Honeypot and I put Cloudflare Turnstile on there. For me, that's usually enough.
Yeah.
But if you need to introduce some other stuff, then you could bring this down and then bring it up and then slowly bring it down. To whatever level that you want. So let's talk about the captures quickly. To add captures, very, very simple. You can just go down to the spam protection section on the toolbox here in WS Form. And if you want to add a Cloudflare Turnstile, for example, all you got to do is just drag that onto your form. And that's pretty much it. Now, there are 2 keys that are associated with these captures, and I'll show you how those are set up. So if we go to Settings in WS Form, we go to the Spam Protection tab, you just basically enter your keys in here. And then no matter how many different forms you've got, these keys will then be used on all of those forms. Now, some of the captures, you may want to have different captures for different forms. For example, Cloudflare Turnstile, you can actually set up different captures for different forms on your site, and then you can monitor those individually. So if we go back to the form that we were on, let's refresh this. So we've got our one on there. So when I click on Turnstile field settings to edit the settings, you'll see it's going to default to the global settings. But you can type in your own key in there if you want to. So you can override it. But by having them as global settings, it just makes it easier. If you've got lots and lots of forms, it will just copy it to all of them. If we preview that, you'll see how that looks. So it's very, very simple. It just, nice thing about Cloudflare is it just immediately says success most of the time. There's no challenge there. And that's it. It's as simple as that to set that up. There are different flavors of captures as well. So for example, with Cloudflare Turnstile, you can actually make that invisible so the user doesn't even see that process. And it just looks like a regular form. Same with reCAPTCHA with Google. So if we add a reCAPTCHA to the form, generally you don't want 2 of them on a page, obviously. But
I notice you're nestling them above the submit button. That seems to be the default place to put them.
Yeah, generally just put it as the last thing the user has to potentially deal with. Now, reCAPTCHA will usually throw up a challenge, right? But they do have an invisible version as well. So we support version 2 and version 2 invisible. So if you are using a version 2 key, they do have an invisible version of that you don't really see on the form. And then version 3 is an invisible version. So you can choose which of those that you want to use on your page. HCAPTCHA is very similar to reCAPTCHA. It's just supposedly kind of less intrusive, and it's more it doesn't take as much data from the user apparently. So it's just another flavor of reCAPTCHA that people tend to like. I find HCAPTCHA to be a little bit slower than reCAPTCHA. And some of the challenges can be a little bit clunky. But my personal favourite is Cloudflare Turnstile. I've had no trouble with it.
They're
I
all
have it on all
free,
of my
right? There's no
They're all
tier.
free, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
all free services. Even the new Cloudflare Turnstile is free as well, yeah. That's the nice thing about them. But you know why reCAPTCHA exists, right?
Hmm.
It's for their
Oh, I know.
autonomous
It's to
vehicle
so that
program.
they know what their photos are full of.
Yeah,
It's quite
exactly.
cynical, really, isn't it?
That's why it's free.
Yeah.
So when you're clicking on those road signs and bridges and cars and bikes, you're actually feeding their artificial intelligence systems for the autonomous vehicle program.
But also, it helped in Google Photos algorithm to figure out
Yes,
what
yeah,
things were. You know, if I
yeah, yeah.
show me pictures that I've taken of hippopotamus, well,
That's right.
you know, not many of those, but at
Yeah,
least it knows what it is. I often used to get asked what this number is. So it used to show me a number which was
that's
clearly on
right.
somebody's
Yeah,
front door or something like
yeah,
that, and
yeah.
you have
That's
to
right.
type it in.
Yeah,
It's become a little bit less intrusive, but it's still, of all of them, I feel that it has the capacity to make me throw rocks at the screen.
right. Yeah,
Just, do you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's just, okay, I've shown you all the motorbikes, and
yeah.
I've got to show you more motorbikes, and now some more
And
motorbikes.
more
And
motorbikes.
I'm never
Yeah,
quite convinced which bit of the traffic light is the actual traffic light. Is the
right.
post part of the traffic light, or the cable, or anyway? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's and again, that's I keep going on about it. That's why I like to Turnstile because it just doesn't do that.
doesn't do that. Yeah,
It's doing something to detect if you're a human or not. I'm assuming it's checking for mouse movement and things like that, or maybe touch events.
I think there is a bit of that, because if you stay still and don't interact in
Yeah,
any way, that there is a definite pause, and then as soon as you start interacting with the mouse, it figures something's going
yeah,
on there, doesn't it? Can I
yeah.
just ask you one question? If you go back to the
Sure.
human presence, you mentioned that the form didn't get submitted. Now, does
Mm.
that mean that if you use human presence, the submit button is disabled until you've got something back from them?
It actually shows a message, so it'll
Okay,
say spam detected, and then it won't submit. So yeah, that's basically the way that works.
okay,
Yeah, their plugin does all the work itself in the background, and we basically query it, and then we get a yes or no back. It's as simple as that, and
okay,
then we show a message if we're not going to submit that form.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, actually, going back to HCapture, if you want some comedy, HCapture actually shows some amazing stuff. Right, there's a squirrels. Which images show squirrels swimming through a lake and things like that? It's
Oh,
quite
wow, it's
funny.
very specific. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good luck with that.
yeah, yeah. So
That's
they
an
must,
otter.
yeah,
Clearly, it's an otter. The heck were you thinking? Yeah.
must use that data for something else. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about validation on a form as well. So very basic validation is things like using an email field for an email address. Believe it or not, we do have some users that will add a text field for everything,
Oh,
and they'll use that for an email address. Use an email field for an email
yeah.
address because it will validate the email address and make sure the email is correct. There are other things that you can do on fields as well, and I use a text field as an example here. But if you go into the Advanced tab, we do have things like setting restrictions on minimum characters, maximum characters, and things like that. You've also got input mask as well. So if you've got a specific thing that you want people to type in, such as a postcode or a social security number or anything like that, you can actually set up some quite elaborate input masks. We do have a knowledge base about how that works, but that can be
So that
used to.
pre-fills the field with like placeholders and
Yeah,
hyphens and things like that. Where,
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's
okay,
right. Yeah. So you kind of get a little
yeah,
mask like this appearing,
hmm,
and then you can you have to check that that's correct. Pattern matching is actually a part of HTML5. It's an attribute on the fields, and that again is where you can use a regular expression. Now, again, we've said this on every episode. We're not going to go into regular
no,
expressions
no, thanks.
on this, but that is a way of making sure that the data entered is correct. Now, some of these things are client-side only checks, and some of them are actually checked on the server side as well. So we do some server-side stuff. So if the bot does try to submit the information, then we'll check it on the server side as well. Even setting fields as required can be a way of validating data on the client side. So there's some ideas, around validation on the form,
Mm.
your reCAPTCHAs, your turnstiles, your HCAPTCHAs, the spam measures that we've got. We've got the human presence, the Akismet, the Honeypot option. Use them as much or as little as you want to use. I would recommend with a new form, go with the basics, and then if you start to see spam coming through, ramp it up. If you start to use some of the third-party services like the server-side stuff, like maybe CleanTalk, for example, bear in mind that some of those services make API requests off to a third-party server, and that can slow down form submission. So you use these services sparingly, and only use them, as and when you feel that you need them. Okay, so that's some of the spam measures that we have in
That's
WS
great.
Form
Really
on the client side.
comprehensive.
So,
Lovely.
So let's carry on. Okay, so let's talk about improving email deliverability. So what we're talking about here is getting that email from the site to you. And this is probably our number one support question. And I would imagine it's probably the number one support question for other form plugins as well. Now, we do have a lot of information in our knowledge base about this, but I want to run through some of the key things. Now, when you sign up for hosting that has WordPress on it, 9 times out of 10, it's going to just send emails directly from that server and try and get it to the recipient without anything in between to try and improve that process. So the default way of sending an email in WordPress is that you're going to submit the form. A form plugin is going to take that form submission and it's going to push it through to a function called WP Mail. Now, WP Mail is a PHP function. It's actually a wrapper for a library called PHP Mailer. And PHP Mail is just it's an open source piece of code for sending emails. And the WP Mail function makes it super easy for a WordPress developer to send an email. You can specify the to address, the subject line, the message. You can add what are called headers, and headers are used for things like setting the from address. You can also set up tracking headers and things like that. And then you can also send attachments with that as well. So it's a nice and easy way of doing it. The problem is that when WP Mail is used, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to get to the other end. And there are various reasons for that. A lot of email packages that you're using now have different measures in place. We'll go into those in a moment, that it expects to see in order for that email to be received and actually sent on to the recipient. And if you're using WP Mail alone, 9 times out of 10, that email is not going to get there. And that's when we get a support ticket saying, my form's not working, it's not sending emails. And it's not a WS Form issue, it's actually an upstream issue with getting the email to the user. The first thing we would recommend doing is install an SMTP plugin. And what an SMTP plugin does is, rather than using PHP Mailer, WP Mail will be routed to an SMTP service to send that email. And an SMTP provider can provide much more efficiency on getting that email to the intended recipient. So what we would recommend you do is go into the plugin directory, do a search for SMTP, and then pick an SMTP plugin that you like the look of. Here's an example of one, Post SMTP. Not recommending it, it's just one that pops up. It's one of the top ones that come up. It's a very reputable SMTP plugin. And what that plugin will do is it will plug into one of many different SMTP providers. So there are several out there. I personally use Amazon SES, which is Amazon's simple email service. But there are plenty of others out there that are sometimes a little bit easier to use. Amazon SES is quite involved. But things like SendGrid are a good one. Mailgun is a good one. Also, if you've got an existing email provider like Gmail or Office 365, you can actually use that to send the email through as well. But some of the nice things about some of these SMTP providers is that they will provide you with things like logging and stuff like that, so you can identify issues with your email sending. So the way an SMTP provider works is the form is completed, that gets sent to the form as before. The SMTP plugin intercepts that email, and it will then be sent on to the SMTP provider, either as an SMTP request. SMTP, by the way, stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Or it'll do it using an API. So SMTP is a very, very old standard. I mean, I think it's 60s, 70s when it was invented. I forget the actual year. But it's because it's so old, it's widely used. It's very simple to use, but it doesn't have much in the way of making sure the email is received by its recipient. There's generally nothing that comes back. Sometimes you'll get a message saying, there's been a transient delivery failure. An email provider along the way will kindly send you a message back saying, sorry, we couldn't get it to you. But SMTP itself doesn't have any, it's not very reliable in terms of actually getting a message to the recipient. It just sends. Now, if you're using an API with an SMTP provider, they can actually provide information back to an SMTP plugin and say, hey, there was a problem sending the email through. So the benefits of using an SMTP provider, you've probably got some logging there, so you can see if emails are getting through okay, if there's any problems. They'll actually queue and retry sending emails as well. So if there is a problem getting that email out, they'll queue it up and they'll try and send it again. They also use these wonderful little technologies here, which I'm not going to go into in detail here, but DMARC, DKIM, and SPF. So these are different authentication protocols and methods that are used with emails, so that when the email is received by the client, the recipient, their system, they're able to check that that email has come from somebody that is authorized to send that email. So usually, in general, the way it works is there's a key, maybe in a header or something, which the key is then sent back to the source domain to say, hey, did this come from you? And if it does, then it allows the email through. Now, these are all things that don't happen if you don't have that SMTP provider in place. The more of these things that you can implement, and a lot of these SMTP providers will implement this for you. You may have to do some DNS setup to get it working, but it's a relatively straightforward process to get that working. All right. So that's, using a plugin to improve deliverability. There are also things you can do in terms of making sure that when you're sending an email out from a form, that it's configured correctly. Now, these are the recommended settings that we put out there for a form. So in WS Form, let's go back to here. If we go to Actions and we look at a send email action, let's just make this a bit bigger so we can see it. I'll zoom in a bit. You have these different settings here. You've got the from email address, you've got the from display name, that's optional, and then you've got where the email is going to, and a display name for that as well. Again, that's actually optional. And then you've got the reply to field as well. So I'll just run through those and show you what those mean. Now, your from email address, when you're working with a SMTP provider, I know I keep saying that, Marcus, you're generally going to be authorizing a domain or an email address. So basically, you have authorized the use of this email address to allow it to send emails out from your server. And that email address, you want to keep the same all the time. So don't put in there maybe the user's the email address of the user that has filled out your form. Keep that consistent. The display name, you can set that to anything that you want. So that can be the user's name, it could be a company name, anything that you need. One thing just to bear in mind with that, and we've come across this, is that some of those SMTP plugins don't like display names. There is a standard out there which WP Mail actually, the function actually abides to, which is where you basically combine an email address and a display name together. We found that some SMTP plugins don't abide to that rule, which is really strange given that they're an email plugin. But just bear that in mind. So if you find an email is not sending, that can sometimes be the reason. If you remove the display name, it may work. We've reported that to quite a few of them, and they have actually fixed it, which is great. The to address can basically be anybody. So that would be an email to you to get an acknowledgement, or it could be an email to the customer to say, hey, thanks for your inquiry. So there's two ways you can do that. On the to address, you could literally just put in, your email address. You can actually use variables in here, WS Form variables. So by default, we actually set that to the blog admin email address. Another way you can do it is if somebody is filling out that form and you want to send an email to them, you can get that ID there, so 974. Now, if I go into Actions and go to Send Email, if I want to send it to that email address, I can dynamically insert that in here and put hash field in 974. So yeah, the to address can be anything you want. You can send to multiple email addresses with WS Form. So you can actually put in, I could send one to me as well. Now, if you've got maybe a sales team, you may have 3 people. So you might have A, you might have B, and you might have C. Now, you may want to send that to all 3 people and say, hey, work out who's going to get that. You can also do what's called round robin. So if you click on round robin here, you can actually set it so that it will send to each of these people equally. So A will get it, then B will get it, then C will get it.
I think this is worth exploring actually, just for a few moments, because this is cool. So let's say that I've got a sales team. There's 10 people in that team.
Yep.
What you're saying is that person 1 will get it a proportion of the time. Person 2 will get it another proportion of the time. You could say like everybody gets it 10%, or I don't know, the first employee is working twice as many days, so they should get 20% instead of 10%, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so by default it's set to auto, so it'll split it equally between them. But you could put in here 50%, 25%, 25%.
Perfect.
And then this person will get it twice as much as these. Yeah.
And is that's just a straight up, it's doing it in some kind of iteration. It's doing 2 to A, then 1 to B, 1 to C, then back to the top, 2 to A, 1 to B, or is it kind of more random?
There's an algorithm behind there.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not precise. So it won't be 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1.
Yeah.
What it does is it reassesses every time it sends. So what it's going to do, it's going to go, okay, this person has received 1 email. These have received none. So maybe I should send this person 1.
Got it.
And I'll send this one. Oh, and this one, he's got some capacity, so I'll send him that again. Now we're back to 0 again.
Got it.
So let's go through the cycle again. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's entirely up to you how you set this round robin up. But
that's brilliant.
Some people, it's good for teams, that are using this. You can switch that on and off very, very easily. You can also CC people. So that's basically the carbon copy field that you see on an email. This enables you to add multiple CCs. And you can also do a BCC, which is blind carbon copy. So if you're not familiar with that, what that'll do is it'll send it to another recipient, but anybody on the to or CC won't be aware that it has been sent to that blind carbon copy person. So if you wanted to send an acknowledgement to the customer and also receive that yourself, but they don't see that you've received that, or you don't want your email address to appear so they can reply to it, you can add that as a BCC. Reply to. Now, this is quite a useful field. And what reply to does is it enables you to determine where a email will go if someone clicks reply. So going back to the from address there, because we will always want to send the email from an address that's authorized, so that it will get through to the recipient, by setting the it's all right. Forward one. By setting the reply to field, you can determine that the email will go back to a particular email address as opposed to your authorized email address that you're sending from. So just to give an example of that, if you were sending an email to a customer, for example, you'd maybe put in the to field, maybe hash field 74, that's where we want that to go to this email address. If they reply, rather than going to your blog email address or the approved email address that we've set up, you maybe want that to go to your sales team, for example. So you could put sales at, mysite.com, whatever you may want to put in there. If you are receiving an acknowledgement from a customer to yourself, then you would probably want the email to go to you. So maybe that would go to
the other way around, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Email address, and the reply to would go
that field.
That field there. Yeah.
Yep. So this is when you're looking at the email in your email client, Gmail or whatever it is. When you receive that email and have read it, when you click the reply button, it's going to whatever it says in that field.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So getting these fields is quite important to make sure that the emails are received both to you and to your customers. And these are probably the most critical ones, is the from address, making sure that that's authorized, and a reply to, just to make sure that if a reply occurs, then it comes back to you as well. Otherwise, when they hit reply, it's going to go back to whatever email address is set up on the from address. Again, there's information about that in our knowledge base. If you go to knowledge base /email-notifications-not-working, then there's all of this information is in there. We've got quite a few things in there about how to improve deliverability.
Just one quick thing on that. I think Gmail, for example, I think their current sending limit because they don't have an infinite supply. Their sending limit, I think, is something like 200 a day. So typically that's going to be fine, right?
Yep.
But if you're running a major e-commerce store, that's probably not the best solution, because it's going to cap out at 200 and your account's going to get flagged. So yeah, give that a bit of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very, very true. Some of these SMTP providers will give you, a free amount every month.
Yeah.
But you can go over that, in which case I think you can upgrade to a paid account.
And I think Amazon SES, I think each email is something like 1,000th of a US cent. I mean, it's maybe not that, but it's akin to that. It's adjacent.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously cheap.
Yeah, I don't even notice. I mean, personally, I don't notice it. Some sites send tens of thousands of emails every hour, so it becomes more of a concern. But
yeah,
most of these services are very inexpensive, as you say.
Yeah.
And well worth investing in. Just some other potential issues before we wrap up. One of the things that we find with WS Form is sometimes people won't hit the magic publish button on the form. So let's just talk about that quickly. The editing process in WS Form is such that you can play around with the form as much as you want without it impacting the live version of the form on the site. So that enables you to preview it and test, maybe different layouts, different features without impacting the live site. When you're ready to put the form live, you hit the publish button up here. We've had a few instances where people have made changes to a send email setting here. They've hit save and close, and they expect that to work. You've actually got to hit that publish button. So make sure that publish button has been clicked to make sure any changes are actually, because basically everything on this form is in draft state until you hit publish. So if you edit conditional logic, if you edit actions, if you change anything on the form, that's all put in reserve until you hit that publish button. So that's a vital.
Can I ask a question about the UX of that? If I've done a load of major changes and then I try to close that window down prior to publishing, do I get some kind of notification saying, "Whoa"?
It actually saves it all for you.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah,
it's not published. The changes are saved. The state is saved. But
that's right.
Publish, but it hasn't been published. Got it.
Yeah, but it's all saved. Yeah. So what actually happens when you click the publish button in WS Form, it actually compiles the form into a single JSON packet, which makes rendering of the form on the front end very quick. So when you actually render a form on your website, it's one database query to get the whole form. So when I then make changes, so if I drag another field onto this, you'll notice that the publish button will become live because it's detected some changes.
Yeah.
So all the changes are stored on the server in the database. But when I hit that publish button, it then publishes that form to a different location, and that's what's actually used on your live site. So it enables you to do as much work as you want on the form. And if you go away for a cup of tea and close this down and then come back again, you can carry on editing it. It will retain where you currently are, so you won't lose any data.
I think we mentioned in episode 1 that you also get a history of changes made to the form. So if you bungle it up and screw it up in some way, you can just nip back.
And that's per session. So that if you do close down and come back, that will be lost. We don't store every change because it would just be a ridiculous
huge
amount of data.
Nice.
But we have. If you go to undo here, you've actually got a log of everything that's happened on that form, and you can go back to any step that you want. So that's session based, but the actual editing of the form is all saved, and you can come back to it at a later date. So remember that one. The other thing is sometimes, and I have come across this, sometimes hosting providers are just not set up to send emails crazily. And you may get this error saying could not instantiate malfunction. If that happens, contact your hosting provider and make sure they've got email sending set up on your hosting so you can actually send emails out. I'm quite surprised when that happens, but we do get it. Avoid sending emails from and to the same email address. So sometimes if you send an email from your personal email to your personal email, that can be classed as spam. So that can sometimes block an email coming through. So make sure that you're not doing that. And also check your spam folder. So this is kind of the last step, which is about when that email does actually get through to that user. We've gone through all those steps. We've made sure you're not a bot. We've actually put everything in place we can do to get the email to the recipient. At the end, that email client may look at that email and go, no, I'm not going to show that to my user. I'm going to put that in the spam folder. And there are so many reasons that can happen. Even putting dear and then their first name can be classed as spam, funnily enough, or
Wow.
hi and then their name can be classed as spam.
Hmm.
Certain words can be classed as spam. So if you've got even anything financial in that communication, that can sometimes be classed as spam. So when you're sending emails out and you are editing the send email action, so let's go into that. We go to send email and we come down to where the actual message is here. The content in here can be vital as to whether or not that email is received by an email client. There are some services online that you can go to where you can actually copy and paste your email content into them, and they'll check it to see whether or not it's considered spam or not. So you might want to have a look at some of those. But yeah, so this part here and your subject line as well can be critical to whether or not that email is going to be received. So try and keep it, try and steer clear of like financial words, anything to do with
Bitcoin.
yeah. Don't put the word Bitcoin or Viagra or anything like that in your subject line or message, because you're going to have trouble. Now, if you find that it is inadvertently going to spam, then I don't know why it keeps going to the next slide. If it does go into spam, then there are ways you can whitelist it in different email clients. So you could whitelist your from address just to make sure that those are coming through and none of those do end up in spam. And the other thing to bear in mind is that when people are filling your form out, they're going to be putting all types of different content in the message box. So if you've got an inquiry field, that's going to be taken into account on the client side when it's received. So what they're typing in that you can't control is going to may be classed as spam. So by whitelisting that from address, you can, remediate the issue of those potentially ending up in the spam box.
There's services like MX Root, which will ROUTE, not ROOT, which give you. That's never going to be not funny. Oh dear, it reminds me of WordCamp Asia, and I was never there.
It does. I've still got you here. I always keep Nathan handy.
It's always good to have a cardboard cutout of Nathan on hand. Services like MX Root will give you some sort of insight into whether or not you are passing the necessary tests. Right. I must admit, a lot of that is a bit of a mystery to me. We had a presentation at the Page Builder Summit all about DKIM and SPF and all of that, and it was quite informative. It's not an area which most people get into, and yet it can be.
Yeah, it's one of those things you set up and forget about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you never really get into it that much or understand what you're doing.
But also a bit of a black hole in that, if you're clearly getting information sent into your contact form and you're sending out things that people should follow up on and nothing's coming back, definitely time to look at it. But the thing is, you can't be sure from the outset what is landing in people's inboxes. So. Yeah,
and it's a shame that we have to do all this, really.
Yep.
And part of this is just because of that old specification for sending emails. It never had any of this in it. So these are things that have been retroactively invented to try and circumvent those issues. It's
interesting as well because email constantly, everybody's predicting its demise and its doom, and yet my understanding is it is going strong. It is still the best way of communicating with people. Not everybody's on WhatsApp, not everybody's using Signal or Messenger or whatever it might be, Snapchat and things, but email, more or less everybody's got one. I don't know if that'll continue. Well, the younger generation do seem to be a little bit like my kids. Don't go anywhere near email, but they seem to be able to communicate with everybody.
Yeah, maybe that'll change when they.
But it'll change probably when they get to the workplace, and that's just what they got.
Just one other thing to add at the end: don't rely on email 100%. Make sure that you've got a save submission action on your form. Now, every form that you create in WS Form, other than post management forms, which we're going to talk about next week, have a save to submission action on them. And what that does is it will save the form data, and then that's accessible within submissions here. So you've got that as a backup. So make sure that you're using other methods for saving those form submissions. And this save to submissions is something that's built into WS Form. In fact, if you're using our Lite edition, we include that with the Lite edition. Some form plugins don't actually save submissions on the plugin repo versions. So ours includes that.
Do you get to limit the number of days that it's held there? GDPR and all that.
Yeah, so you can actually do auto expire submissions. Right. You can choose how many days you want to keep those. You can switch that off and just keep everything if you want. But that's just a nice little feature. You can go into the submissions. Well, let's just create one and show you quickly. Let's just create a contact us form, and we'll go to preview, and we'll use the debug console to submit that. Populate and submit. And then we'll go back to submissions, and there you go. So you can actually view the submissions in here. This gives you a log of all the fields that were filled out. It also shows you what actions will run when that submission was made. You can actually see the send email action here. It shows you the settings that were used to send that email. So you can use this to debug email sending. And it'll also, if you click the eye icon here, it'll show you whether or not that email was sent successfully. And if there was a problem sending that email, it'll actually show you the error message. Now, if you find that an email hasn't gone, you can actually click this run again icon here, and it will actually send that email out again to that user. So you can rerun actions with WS Form to do that. You can also export this data. So if you've got, say, 1,000 entries in here, and you want to export those to an Excel spreadsheet or to numbers or Google Sheets, you can click Export CSV, and it will create an export for you. And then you've got a CSV file of all your submissions as a backup. So there you go.
Thank you. I want you to say the words eye icon like a pirate.
Eye icon.
Oh, yeah. Eye icon. Oh, I don't know why that came into my head. Yeah, there you go. Look, WP Builds joins forces with Mr. Westgard. WS Form, 20% off. There's the link, wpbuilds.com/link/WS Form. Yep. And then if you use the code WP Builds, you're going to get 20% off any edition. And I think it's fair to say we're 3 shows in. You're probably by now figuring out that this is a fairly robust solution, but we're only halfway through. We've done form building basics, interactive forms, all the spam and what have you today. And then next week, we're on to custom field plugin integrations. So all of the different ways that you can integrate your custom forms for. Is that going to be where you're touching on things like creating posts and creating users and stuff like that?
Correct, yeah. So we very deeply integrated in with advanced custom fields, ACF, pods, Metabox, Jet Engine, and Toolset. So you can use WS Form in conjunction with those custom field plugins to create posts, to edit posts, and it also works with user functions as well. So you can actually use those custom field plugins to add custom fields to users. Maybe like an avatar image or whatever. And you can basically use those custom field plugins to modify users and posts, and we'll go through that next week.
Yeah, if you've never done that before, tune in next week, because it changes the game on what you can suddenly get your website to do. All of a sudden, you can get user submitted content.
And you'll like the way WS Form does that. It's very clever because it builds forms for you, and it saves an awful lot of time.
Well, we'll be back next week. I appreciated that. That was a really nice episode. Thank you for those people who joined in. I'm sorry I didn't raise any of the comments on the screen, but thank you to Peacher, Neil, Michelle, Atif, and Marcus for making comments. Really appreciate it. But we'll be back this time next week, 3 p.m. Wednesday. What'll that be? The 24th or something like that of
something
May.
Like that.
Yeah, something like that. Add 7 to 17. Oh, thank you, John. He says thank you, Nathan and Mark. Well, thank Mark. I just sit here and allow Mark to explain all this wonderful stuff. We'll be back next week. Take it easy, guys. Bye.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.